Okay, guys, this is just a fun, quick review over some legal terminology, some of the documents and forms, some inventory terminology. I decided to just go ahead and do it as a little video so that it'd be kind of quick and y'all could get to experience it. Um, we have a lot to cover, and I also want to discuss tonight. I give plenty of assignments each night, and this is based on lots and lots of experience and having multiple classes. And some students are only getting just a fraction of the work done. So in part, I want to focus tonight on we do need to review the two different exercises y'all did last night. I want to make sure we get through those. I also want you to present your portfolio projects. So let's just have some fun with this. Then I'm going to go, I will probably just give two videotaped presentations reviewing the material from last night. That way our priority will be the portfolio projects tonight. And then if we get time, then we can then do the rest actually live. Otherwise, they'll be videotaped. Yay. Okay. Pharmacy law. Let's see. Captain takes 100. What is the government agency responsible for drug recalls? And by the way, on the test questions you guys missed, many of you missed several of the same questions. And over and over and over, what happened is it would have DEA instead of FDA. It would say like the FDA is responsible for enforcing legislation with controlled substances, or the DEA is responsible for regulating the safety and effectiveness of drugs. So just be very mindful of the little details. DEA, FDA, they're both just three little initials, but they're two completely different agencies. So the government agency that's responsible for drug recalls. Oh, look. Now, how many of you, your parents, just want to know about your day? I'm happy you love taking your classes online. I'm so proud of you. It's the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. They're the ones that are responsible for making the determination as to the level of recall. What is a list of drugs that's approved for a pharmacy's inventory? So this might be in relation to a third party or insurance company's prescription drug coverage, or it can be an institutional or a hospital setting. It's the formulary. HIPAA, what's it stand for? What year did it come out? So I put this in here to kind of trick you. That's not a HIPAA, that's a hippo. HIPAA stands for what? I'll give you a hint. It rhymes with health, insurance, patient. I'll keep going. There we go. Health insurance. See, it wasn't patient. I was seeing if you were paying attention. Health insurance portability. Portable. So if we talk about something being portable, that means we're able to move it. You have a portable radio, you can pick it up and take it with you. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and it was enacted in 1996. And basically the situation was this. Previously, let's say you were in a car accident and the ambulance is taking you to the hospital. They need to know what medications you're taking. They need information from all the doctors you might be seeing, any of the pharmacies where you go. But that would require that you sign an authorization or a consent form. And to do that would just not be practical or possible, especially when time is a sensitive factor. So this Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, what it did, it expanded healthcare providers' ability to share confidential information, a patient's confidential private healthcare information. Now we're limited. We can only share what is absolutely essential, just the minimum information that's necessary. But the accountability, that word, Accountability Act, we're held to this high degree of confidentiality. And in fact, it's one of the few things that if you violate, it has criminal repercussions. So violating HIPAA, you can actually go to jail. What is the DEA 41? I'll tell you now, it's a form, it's a document. What is it? So the DEA 41 form, that's the document that you have to complete and submit to the DEA to account for the destruction of controlled substances. So what happens, a lot of times you're going to have drugs like opened bottles of controlled substances that expire in the pharmacy. You can't just throw them away, and so you have to account for them. Now the law does allow, as long as there's no more than a 3% variation in accountability, you don't have a problem, but still, pharmacists just as a standard, when drugs expire, if you have a bottle, even if it's just got one tablet, you set your expired drugs over to the side, and you have the two most common options. One is you use a reverse distributor. A reverse distributor, what's that? It's a third-party company. They come in, they're going to take that box of expired drugs. You're going to complete a DEA 41 form, because you still have to account for them, but they'll take them, they'll destroy it. They take care of all the legal responsibilities and issues, and then they either charge a fee or you get a tiny percent of whatever money they can collect from sending back to the wholesaler. The second is, and this is the most common because it doesn't cost anything, pharmacists will set aside the expired controlled drugs. And again, it's very important that you make sure that they're separate from the inventory that you're dispensing there, and they're specifically designated as expired. You wait until a compliance officer comes by for a pharmacy visit. You already have your DEA 41 form filled out, and you have a technician do all the counting. You write down all the drugs, when they expired, how many tablets, capsules, or how many milliliters remain. And then that way, when you have the compliance agent and the pharmacist can witness, it's documented, and then you submit the DEA 41 form. Where are we? What's the DEA 106? Now, I'll give you a hint here. If somebody has kind of sloppy handwriting, that one, it might look like an L. This 0 can look like an O. And then if you kind of turn your head sideways and write it a little bit sloppy, that could look like an S. So the DEA 106, that's the document or the form that you have to complete and submit to the DEA to account for lost or stolen controlled substances. So stolen, this could be if somebody comes in with a gun and says, hey, I want all your whatever, and you give them all your controlled drugs and they escape, and you have to go run an audit report and then record everything and submit it to the DEA. Or it can be stolen. It can be an employee, a pharmacist or technician. And we did the articles. You all saw just how common that is. And what's shocking is just how bold or brazen some people can get. One technician, just in a period of 8 months, stole 15,000 hydrocodone. So that's a lot of pills to be smuggling out. One woman, one young lady, she used her pregnancy. So she was actually pregnant. Everyone knew she was pregnant. She had proof of ultrasound, but she was able to use that she was pregnant and wearing clothes that were a little bit larger than normal. And she was just smuggling out bottles of 500 counts of hydrocodone, even pint bottles of promethazine with codeine. Once it's discovered, the pharmacy has to do an audit. You look at the last actual inventory count that you took. You have to look at everything you've ordered in between, everything you've dispensed, and then identify what you actually still have in stock. The difference that's reported as lost or stolen, it's submitted in a DEA 106 form. And the pharmacist in charge has 72 hours from the time that a loss or theft is identified to complete this form and submit it. Okay, which recall? What is the recall level that will cause permanent harm, injury, or death? So who decides? Is it the DEA or the FDA? Well, we've already determined it's the FDA. If it's going to cause harm, injury, or death, it's a recall 1. So just think, if somebody had alerted him maybe 5 minutes earlier, oh well. Now, what is the act that led to the creation of NDC? And what does NDC stand for? Well, NDC stands for National Drug Code. And what happened prior to this, before 1970, there was no unique identifier that distinguished between drugs. And now at that time, nowadays, especially because drugs are so expensive, it's very common. You'll find a medication like, let's say, simvastatin, 20 milligram tablets. It comes in a bottle of 1,000. It comes in a bottle of 500. It comes in a bottle of 100. But because most people take one a day, it also comes in bottles of 90, which would be a 3-month supply if they're on insurance. And it comes in bottles of 30 in case insurance covers a 30-day supply. And so even though it's the identical product, what has happened to this act, what it required was every single drug and package size has its own unique identifier. It's the NDC. The NDC code is going to be 11 digits. It's 5 digits, 4 digits, and 2 digits. Now you'll notice on this one, this has 4 digits up front. Anytime that, like if there's 4 instead of 5, you just add a 0 in front. If this happened to be 198, you would just put a 0 in front. Or if this just happened to be a 2, you'd put a 0. So it's always going to be 5 digits, 4 digits, and 2 digits. And the reason that you see this, it's a little confusing, but it has more to do with the technology for the barcode and the barcode scanner. The barcode scanner can only interpret an even number of numerals that are data transcribed in binary code. So that's why sometimes you're just going to see the 10 digits written out. But for all pharmacy practical purposes, it's an 11-digit code. So the act that led to the creation was the Drug Listing Act of 1972. Which recall may cause harm or injury. However, it's reversible once discontinued. So this might look like it's not pleasant, but if he stops taking the medicine, he's going to be just fine. It's a recall 2, level 2. So recall level 2, it can cause harm or injury, but it's reversible when the medicine is discontinued. Now take a look at this. A nurse comes in and says, "Doc, there's a man in the waiting room who thinks he's invisible. What should I tell him?" And the doctor says, "Tell him I can't see him today." What was the amendment or actually distinguished between OTC and legend? So, by the way, these are just 2 terms. OTC stands for over the counter. That over the counter is defined. These are medications that the FDA has assessed and determined the labeling is sufficient such that a person is able to identify if their condition is something that can be managed with the medication. It's going to have instructions for how to use properly without causing harm. It also includes instructions for when it's time to reach out to a physician or somebody, a specialist or pharmacist. Legend is just another word for it requires a prescription. So legend is a prescription drug, OTC is over the counter. It's the Durham-Humphrey Amendment. Now I kind of put this image here of Humpty Dumpty on account of I had a student, one of my favorites, and this is before I used to give tests without true, false, or multiple choice. So it was stretching the brain. You had to remember things. Well, whenever I asked what acts distinguish between RX and OTC, she wrote the Legend of Humphrey Durham-Free. And I thought that was kind of funny because it's dump. There's a D, U, and an M, and there's a hump, and dump. But and I don't even know if it's a myth or it's just a little children's story. But that she called it a legend. I thought that was funny, and that's how she remembered it. So the Legend of Humphrey Dumphrey. Well, that's how she remembers legend drugs OTC. So there you go. So you can thank Kelly for that. Okay, what is the Act or amendment that gives tax breaks and incentives to drug companies that manufacture medicines for rare conditions? So what are we talking about? There are conditions. Let's say, for example, leprosy. Leprosy only affects a very, very tiny percent of our population. It costs a fortune for a drug company to manufacture any drug. They have to have a manufacturing facility, and just to devote or designate a facility to manufacturing one specific product, it costs millions and millions of dollars. So what can be done? How do we get medicines made? How are we going to ask a drug company to make a medication for a population when we know that they would just lose lots of money? Well, what happened? They came up with this act, and the government gives incentives. Primarily, it's huge tax breaks, but they give companies incentives to manufacture these drugs for people that when it affects a very tiny percent of the population. And here's a hint: it's pointing to the orphanage. So it's called the Orphan Drug Act. Look, it's a thyroid condition. I think I got a thyroid condition. That's my problem too. Which amendment requires that a drug must be both safe and effective? Uh-oh, that cat has one gigantic thyroid. No, that was a little bit harsh, potentially judgmental, especially coming from somebody whose eyes might be a little bit noticeable. The Kefauver-Harris Amendment. And if you guys remember, in the 1960s, we had this thalidomide disaster. Thalidomide was discovered. This drug was amazing. It was used for morning sickness, but it was also used as a medicine to help people sleep. It was widespread throughout Europe. It was made by Upjohn, and they anticipated it just being a blockbuster drug in the United States, so much so to the point they hired their pharmaceutical marketing crew. They were geared up and ready to go. And guess what? The director, Frances Kelly, she was a female director over the FDA. She refused to approve the drug. And the reason she justified, she says, I am not approving any drug that's going to be taken by a pregnant woman until we know if there are any effects on the developing fetus, on the baby. And so she caught a lot of flack for it. As a matter of fact, they tried to undermine her credibility, destroy her reputation, but she stood firm and fast. Well, what happened as this was happening, gradually throughout Europe, people started noticing things, and babies that were born to the mothers taking thalidomide were born with phocomelia. They call it a flipper disease, and it's what happens is you just don't have your arms or your leg limbs. Instead, you have your hands, just right from your chest, you have your hands. There's no arm. And same thing with the legs. Instead of having calves and ankles, and you just have feet, just right at the bottom of your body. So anyhow, what happened though? It took time. It was popping up. It was happening, but it took a short period of time, a couple of weeks, before people started comparing notes and identifying this horrific birth defect was attributed to the thalidomide. Well, just to wrap it up, in the United States, the only people that had access to thalidomide were the drug company was allowed to give samples to doctors who were participating in clinical trials. So what happened is doctors felt really privileged. If they had a relative or a friend who was pregnant, they really felt special because they were able to give them this medicine everybody wanted, but only the physicians were able to get. So anyhow, immediately though, whenever in the United States, it was realized that almost every baby born to a woman who took this medication during pregnancy had phocomelia. Some things happened. There's a book written called the Truth. It's just called The Truth. And basically, keep in mind, these are physicians that had access and using it for their family and friends. Well, and it was illegal to perform abortions, but they estimate between about 8,000 abortions took place. Otherwise, we would have had a much higher number of little babies born with phocomelia in the United States. So anyhow, the Kefauver-Harris Amendment just happened to, it was implemented in a tremendous reaction to thalidomide. But beforehand, if you remember, 1937 is when we had 107 children die from sulfanilamide. That's what created the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. and the FDA, the Food Drug Cosmetic Act. So after 1938, a drug had to be proven safe, but we didn't have anything that was really requiring that it was effective. Then they just tied this all together on when the thalidomide happened, because whenever you have something disastrous, the public is expecting the government to take some sort of action, something to make sure it never happens again. Well, at that time, what they did is they just went ahead and implemented this. The drug not only has to be proven safe, it must be effective. That was the Kefauver-Harrison Act. Now let's see, I bet only 2% of y'all can figure this one out. What is the opposite of always? Coming from take me. I'll have to give that some thought. Uh-oh, where are we? They did that. Okay. There's that cat with the thyroid. All right, so now we're on controlled substances. So what is the schedule of anabolic steroids? Look, yum, tastes like chicken. Testosterone, it's a controlled substance 3. Now keep in mind what agency enforces, regulates, oversees the controlled substances. It's the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. How are drugs scheduled? So the drugs that are identified as having the potential for abuse or addiction, that's how you distinguish first whether it's going to be a controlled substance or a non-controlled. Then they have CS1 through CS5. Now, testosterone's a bit of an exception. What happened with testosterone? It really does not create a euphoria. It doesn't have the same kind of addiction potential that we think of when you talk about narcotics or certain drugs. There are some drugs that when you take, your body becomes very tolerant very quickly. If you stop taking them, you go through a terrible, terrible withdrawal. Testosterone's different. With testosterone, what happened, there was an epidemic, there were bodybuilders, and then there's a lot of people who think if a little bit of something is good, well then a lot is better, and a whole lot more is even better. And bodybuilders, what was happening, they were able to obtain testosterone pretty easily. They got muscles, and just big muscles everywhere. But what was happening now when you inject the testosterone in massive doses, the way testosterone works is in a way just to cut to the chase. Exponentially, it helps your cells break down, rebuild exponentially. So instead of maybe lifting 5 pounds, doing 5 curls of 5 pounds, if you do those 5 curls of 5 pounds, but you've injected 200 milligrams of testosterone, it's like doing 50 pounds 25 times. And so what happens is you break down the cell tissue, but then whenever it's replicating and rebuilding, it's exponentially. So you get a much more significant result from the same amount of effort. The only problem is that this is what was not taken into account. What muscle in your body never stops exercising? It's your heart. So even Mr. Grinch, he does have a heart. And the problem with bodybuilders is their hearts, they would get bigger and bigger. And the problem is you cannot just make a little cut and expand somebody's chest cavity to accommodate an enlarged heart. So these bodybuilders who were just like perfect, phenomenal, the perfect specimens physiologically, were dying. They were confined to bed. They couldn't move. Any kind of stress in their heart. Their hearts had become so big, they could not function. So they were going to require a heart-lung transplant. So the testosterone becoming the Anabolic Steroid Act, it was implemented to really gain hold or control over access to testosterone. What's an example of a CS1? So a controlled substance scheduled 1. So schedule 1, if you'll remember, the most important thing is, well, they are the most highly addictive. They have the highest potential for abuse. But the third and the most important definition or attribute or caveat, they have no FDA-approved medical indication. Is it alcohol? No. Now, between 1918 and 1932, did you know if you wanted alcohol, you could go to a doctor and a doctor would write a prescription for wine or for brandy. And I'll even bring them to school. They had triplicate forms. Texas, the prescription for alcohol, it's like an 8.5 by 11. But look at this. What else would you need to make you not want to drink? Wow, that's not an attractive sight. Dude, you sure that was a cigarette? We're getting closer, warmer. That better not be my eucalyptus. I don't think eucalyptus is controlled. Here we go. LSD, heroin, cocaine, cannabis, MDMA. And MDMA is ecstasy. Ecstasy is 3,4-methyl-deoxymethamphetamine. So that's where the 3,4-methyl-dioxymethamphetamine and Molly. Now, a lot of people get confused. They say cannabis. Everybody's heard of medical marijuana. Dr. Fareed, you just said it didn't have any medical. No, what I said was there's no FDA-approved medical indication in the United States. Now, something to point out, and you're going to find my position. I'm very clear. I'm not a pothead. No, I don't use marijuana. However, I believe it should be legal. I believe you should be able to just buy it at the Chevron station when you're getting gas. It was put on the formulary, the United States Compendium, in 1850, and we had over 700 medications manufactured by brand name companies whenever it was removed from the market. And it was actually removed from the market because they made a very cost prohibitive tax in 1937. But keep in mind, we had multiple proven medical indications for cannabis. So what happened is after it became a Schedule I, there's a lot of red tape. It's so much harder for a drug company to get permission to be able to study and to try to demonstrate its effectiveness. For all technical and practical purposes, you're going to find in law, sometimes there's going to be a difference between federal and state law. And this is a confusing exception, but you're always bound to adhere to the strictest. So federal law, cannabis is a Schedule I. So if you live in California or Colorado and it's recreational or medicinal, as a pharmacy technician, if you use it, you're breaking federal law, you can lose your license. So technically the state law cannot, the federal law, you have to adhere to the strictest. But fortunately, the federal government, they're not really going after states. And I think eventually all the states are going to be on the same page. Just really quickly, something interesting about cannabis. All the way till 1910, cannabis extract, the oil of cannabis. How this was discovered, I do not know, but you'll find that it was used in corn remedies. They looked like little bandages that had medicated cannabis oil in them, and they also came in droppers of cannabis oil. And you would put 1 or 2 drops on a corn, and in 2 to 3 days, that corn would just completely slough off. Now, what was remarkable, though, is after it fell off, brand new healthy skin tissue would start developing. This is something very unique because, and what happened in 1910 is when salicylic acid came out. Salicylic acid is extremely effective for corns and for warts. However, it's just like an acid. It erodes through. It'll remove the corn of the wart. But when it gets down to your skin, to the level of the skin, it's going to leave. It's harsh, and it's going to take a long time for that skin to heal and start recovering. Whereas with the cannabis, the wart or the corn fell off, and then you had regeneration of completely healthy skin. So what happened in, I guess it was 2004, a pharmacist who remembered this information about the cannabis oil had an idea. He thought, well, if it worked for the corns and for the warts, I wonder what it would do for skin cancer. So a group of people, they had to go to Mexico to try it, but they tried it. They were using the cannabis oil on melanoma, on skin cancer. The skin cancer would fall off, and guess what? Healthy new skin tissue would develop. So anyhow, there's a lot of potentials here, but these are our Schedule I: LSD, heroin, cocaine, cannabis, MDMA. What about Stadol nasal spray? Hopefully that's one you'll never see. These patients, oh, it's just dreadful. Stadol comes in a bottle. It's a nasal spray, 10 milligrams per milliliter. There's 8 squirts. And usually it's just, I don't know who came up with this, but most insurance companies will pay for 3 bottles at one time. What happens though is your patient comes in, refills it, and about 3 hours later calls or comes back and says 2 of the bottles were empty, or there was only 1 squirt in the bottle, or whatever. It's just, it's always a problem. I just wish they would take it off the market, because this is what the customer looks like when they're in a good mood. You just wait till they come back and they're trying to convince you that the bottle only had 1 squirt. Regulation. What is the definition of regulation? So now I'm talking, we're kind of reverting back to legal terms. We've got laws. Laws are minimal accepted standards that are set in place. Well, we have to have some way to enforce them. So for example, it's against the law to go steal. Let's say you go steal a pack of gum from the store. You broke the law. Now what? Do you go to jail? Do you get executed? What is the penalty? Who enforces the penalty? Who creates the penalty and establishes the mechanism of justice, the justice system? So what's a regulation? Regulations, that's the written rule and procedure that exists to allow enforcement of laws. It enables you to carry out a law. Look at this. Taco, cat. It's the same spelled forwards and backwards. Taco, cat. Okay, schedules, more schedules. The drugs that end in done, D-O-N-E. And look, just when you think you're looking all glamorous, if it ends in D-O-N-E, it's a schedule 2. We've got methadone, hydrocodone, oxycodone. What about cough syrups with codeine? Sure you heard of purple drink or syrup or lean. Cough syrups with codeine, they're Schedule 5. This is very confusing because the reality is that it's a small amount of codeine. You would never really expect there to be a significant demand for abuse or addiction. However, it turns out that these became popular, and people will mix small amounts with alcohol and be drinking on it all day long. Well, this is a pint bottle, just 480 milliliters or 473. A pint bottle sells in the street for $3,000. What's the nickname for the book that lists the generics under an A-B rating system? So in other words, nowadays our computer does it for us. But if you're filling a drug, the doctor's written for a brand, and the patient says, I'd like the generic. So you order a generic. Well, what book do we look at to verify that this drug we're using is actually A-B rated? It's called the Orange Book. There's 2 terms. And one thing I will remind you about, what's the name of the group of people who determine a formulary for a hospital? It's the pharmacy, so pharmaceutical, and therapeutics, therapeutically. Pharmaceutical and therapeutic committee for formularies. Well, the Orange Book, it has to be pharmaceutically equivalent. That means you have to have the same drug in the same strength and the same dosage form. And if it's a sustained delivery, that same sustained delivery. If it's immediate release, the same immediate release. Therapeutically, that means whenever you use the generic, it better do exactly what the brand name does. One other thing, just so you know, if you ever see this question, what is the range of variation or variability for generic? And it's 5%. So they measure your blood level. So if a person's to take one drug, 100 milligrams, or let's say 80 milligrams of Zocor, and they take a blood level in 6 hours, and then they were to take 80 milligrams of simvastatin, and took a blood level in 6 hours, that blood level needs to be within 5% of the blood level for the brand name product. It can be over or under, but the bottom line is there's a 5% variance allowed. What was the program that's created? It's created by the FDA to report adverse effects for a drug. This program enables one agency to collect all this information and to make it available. So they have an international, there's a website and it's accessible internationally and very well established. It's the FDA's Medical Products Reporting Program. So we will talk about it a little bit more, but keep in mind when a drug is discovered, the first thing that happens is the drug company has to perform clinical trials on animals. Once they're able to demonstrate that the drug is safe enough to test in humans, they get approval from the FDA to proceed. They have to go through 3 clinical trials. The 3 clinical trials, the first trial is a very small trial. It's with actually people that have the condition the drug's supposed to treat. The next trial, it's a larger group of people, and it's mostly people who have the condition, but it's more of a diverse population. And then the third trial is going to be a population that represents the community. But keep in mind, the first clinical trial usually is about 500 people. The second is 2,000, 3,000 people. And the third trial is maybe 10,000, maybe at the most 20,000 people. So by the time a drug is approved by the FDA and reaches the market, it's actually only been taken by about 20,000 people. Once it reaches the market overnight, all of a sudden you have 1,000, 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 people taking this drug overnight. So guess what? Side effects that were not noticed or identified during all the clinical testing will show up. And to account for this, whenever a drug comes out, a brand new drug, especially the first 6 months, anytime a patient reports a side effect, if there's any association, you're obligated as a pharmacy technician or a pharmacist to report it. You have to document it on a specific form, and the form, it's the MedWatch 3500 form, and you complete the form and then you submit it to the FDA, to their MedWatch program. Okay, we're at the end. Okay, what action is the single most important and effective means of preventing the spread of infection or contamination? Think. This is just a words of wisdom I want to impart while I have your attention. You can't hoot with the owls and soar with the eagles. Remember, one day you'll be sharing that insight with your child. So if you don't know this, I'm going to be sad. It'll mean I've failed totally, utterly, completely. Who needs toilet paper? Where's the conditioner? What was the big deal with all this toilet paper hoarding? Okay, what is the action? It's washing your hands properly. How do we do this? You wet your hands, you apply the soap, lather, and scrub 20 seconds. You're going to rinse 10 seconds, then pat dry and turn off the tap. Now, so a couple of things that are important to know. Whenever you wash your hands, the reason it's important to use warm water and to actually, you sing happy birthday twice, but the reason you do it for 20 seconds, the soap is antibacterial or bactericidal, but there's an element, there's friction that's removing germs. So you can have germs and you can also have loose skin dander that's going to be coming off. So whenever you're running warm water over your hands, not only is the soap killing any kind of infectious microorganisms, you're also washing them off your hands, washing them down the drain. And then that extra rinse, that's just to removing the soap residue and just to further get it off. As opposed to, we have those the sanitizers that are just alcohol-based, and you pump it into your hands, and then you massage your hands fast and furious, and then it just kind of dissolves and evaporates. Those are effective, but they're not nearly as effective. So just remember, one thing that I want you to remember is that whenever you're washing your hands, this part, there is a reason for the 20 seconds. It's not just the soap that's killing the infectious microorganisms, it's that friction and movement. Look at this, guys. I was having a lousy day until I got your text, and now I can't stop smiling. So I hope that's how you feel for the rest of the class and how you feel after taking your 2 finals. I'm going to move on. I'm going to cover the 2 tests that you did last night. I'm going to make them as a video just to have in case we don't get to them tonight, and that way you'll be able to watch them at your own speed and your own time. Everybody, you guys have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for watching.